Welcome, everyone. Woo. So we are so lucky today to have two amazing people talking to us about current issues in homeschooling in our community, in Pennsylvania, and then what's going on around the country. So we have today Darren Jones, who's an attorney. Sorry, Darren.
You jumped.
He's an attorney who's worked with HSLDA since 1996. He spends most of his time working with homeschool leaders, homeschool group leaders, talking with HSLDA members in legal difficulties, writing legal briefs, and overall advocating for the fundamental rights of parents to direct the education of their children. Woo. We are also lucky to have today Sharon Sedlar, who's a dedicated advocate for educational freedom and the founder of Families for Education Choice, a nonprofit that seeks to join, support, and mobilize families and students in the pursuit of educational freedom. So I'm going to pass the mic over to them. They have so much amazingness to share with you today. Here you go, Darren.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks very much for coming. We appreciate it. You will notice there's some overlap between Sharon and me here. We both tend to like the words freedom and parents. So I'm going to kind of start off with talking about that from a specifically homeschool advocate perspective. We work with laws all over the country, and I'll talk a little bit later on about some of my history with the homeschool movement because I was a homeschool graduate, among other things. But there were kind of levels of freedom to choose education all across the country. So specifically, again, since I work with homeschoolers most, I'm going to focus on that now, and then we'll get into others. But there's the level of freedom. For example, if you cross the river into New Jersey, if you want to homeschool your kids, you homeschool your kids. And then there's the level of freedom here in Pennsylvania, where you are required to let the school district know, and then there's some stuff you have to do at the end of the school year. Pennsylvania also is not unique, but in a minority in that it actually lays out some of the requirements for graduation, the subjects you have to teach. Most states don't do that. Then there's the level of freedom that, for example, is in Georgia, where if you want to homeschool, you let the local school district know every year, but you only have to do testing every 3 years. And then there's the level in New York, which is notice of intent. Then they send you a plan to fill out within 6 weeks called the Individualized Home Instruction Plan, IHIP. Then you tell them as part of that IHIP when you are going to be giving them your quarterly reports, where you tell what your kid did in every subject for that quarter. And woe betide you if you do not complete at least 80% of what you were planning to do during that quarter, because that can land you in front of the school board. That's New York. And then there's Massachusetts, where you have to go ask permission to homeschool. You have to get it's legal. And there are cases that say you have a right to homeschool, but you have to get your program approved before you do it. So you can probably guess HSLDA is generally trying to take states from the Massachusetts level of freedom and push them more toward the New Jersey level of freedom. And we were just able to do that this year, legislative session. Wyoming has joined the list of states where if you want to homeschool your child, you just homeschool your child. All right, so that's talking about freedom from a homeschool perspective. However, that's not, of course, the only kind of educational freedom there is. Sharon.
All right, thanks, Darren. So my name is Sharon Sedlar. I'm with Pennsylvania Families for Education Choice. And my journey started because I am a mom to 6 girls. They're aged 14 to 25, almost 26. So I had a very busy 11 and a half years for a while there. And it doesn't stop there, it just gets busier in a different way. But each one of my girls needed something different throughout their educational journey. Some were okay with private school, some were okay with district school, but things changed in both of those education models. And so we cyber schooled, then COVID came. This current year, I'm homeschooling one of my kids. So we need to be able to move to whatever whatever education option suits us best, suits our child best, right? And parents are uniquely qualified to be able to determine the best educational pathway for their child. So really, the freedom conversation isn't about you must do it here or what we're permitted to do. It's we need to open it up for all of the options, for all of the families, without restriction to socioeconomic status or zip code, right? So I'm going to tell you about my daughter and what brought me into the education choice sphere. Number 6, I'm a mom who has been through the ringer, okay? I've had 5 girls before her, know my district, know what's happening, everything's going great. My daughter in 2nd grade, all of a sudden, scared to death to go to school. I can't understand why. I go to the school district. The school district says, let's do a student assistance plan, right? We're gonna help you. We're gonna set her up with a friend in the morning, an art therapy room. We're gonna do all of these great things for you. Okay, her condition deteriorated. It went from stomach aches and like dragging her feet in the morning, not eating her breakfast. She was sleeping, not next to me, but on me, every single night. After 7 months of begging, bribing, pleading, and even to the point of threatening, because I was being threatened by the district about magistrate and truancy issues, that kind of thing. My 7-year-old stands in front of me in my dining room one morning and says, "Mommy, I'm sorry." She's apologizing to me. And she's like, "I'm sorry, I can't go back there anymore." So here a little 7-year-old is just a shell of a child. And I knew if I sent her back one more day, she was gonna shatter, just shatter. So cyber charter, because I didn't feel experienced enough in the homeschool environment, was what we chose for her. We tried homeschooling this year. Unfortunately, she is too used to the structure and the schooled environment, so she is going back to cyber charter. But I still hold hope that maybe I'll be able to get my act together enough so that she can go back to the homeschool environment. But that's the problem. Like when you're in district education, even if we supplement her homeschool education with the district environment, I have heard horrible things about what is happening up at the district. It's not a safe environment for her. So I don't need the district telling me what to do, the cyber charter telling me what to do, my neighbor telling me what to do. I need to be able to do what I need to do for my child, for her safety, her well-being, and for my family's well-being. And so that's what I advocate for. We advocate for parent rights. We want to support every single parent in their decision to do what's right by their child. So what does that mean? Here in Pennsylvania, as I just outlined, we have district, we have private, we have charter schools, which are public schools. We have cyber charter virtual, we have homeschool, and we have this really cool thing called micro schools, which is a subset of the homeschool environment. And so I'm going to talk about that just for a minute. So micro schools or education pods came about because homeschooling families wanted something a little bit different. They wanted to gather in various ways. They've been doing it forever. But microschooling is kind of a new name put on an old-fashioned concept of getting the homeschool families together in a structured or unstructured environment, depending on what the parents want, right? And so along with that comes legislation and some different programs that we'll talk about in a little bit. So I don't want to go into that right now. But that's what we stand for, that's my story, and that's why I'm here. So I am one of you, you're one of us, we get it. I'm one of you, I've been there, I've done that, and we just need to fight for our kids in whatever way possible. So one of the things I always say is pay attention to what's happening around you, pay attention to legislation coming down the pike, and make sure that you voice your opinion and that they don't let you be silenced when you're fighting for your kids.
So one of the things that both of us wanted to talk about some is kind of what we're hearing from parents here in Pennsylvania and around the country, because thankfully a lot of parents do speak up when it comes to their kids' education, but a whole lot don't exactly know what their rights are. So HSLDA has been fighting since the 80s for the concept that parents have a fundamental right to choose their kids' education. That's actually been enacted in law in a lot of states. Here in Pennsylvania, for example, especially if you're doing it for religious reasons, you have a lot of protection in law to do all sorts of options. As she mentioned, one of the things that started coming up in the kind of the mid-20 teens or so was this concept of homeschool parents wanted something that looked a little different. Now, I was a homeschool graduate. In my case, my parents started homeschooling me and my siblings when I was in grade 11. My two other siblings were younger. And we did co-op 2 afternoons a week. And then the parents got together, there were 7 or 8 families, after 1 year and said, you know what, trying to do 2 afternoons a week is just too much. We want to homeschool, not keep running to co-op. And so for my 12th grade year, co-op was every Monday instead of every Monday and Wednesday. Fast forward about 15, 25 years, and homeschool parents, some of them still want that, but a lot of them are saying, wait a minute, I don't want my kid to be sitting here 4 days a week and just go into co-op 1. We want something different. And so we've got, depending on where you are, we've got things like pods, or called micro schools, or they might be called learning pods, or they might be called homeschool assistance programs, and these are the types of groups that I talk to on a daily basis, trying to figure out how does that fit into your state's law. Because here in Pennsylvania, doing micro school, not so hard. There's some nice little niches you can fit in, depending on whether you want to run it as a homeschool program or as a private school program. And there are different ways that you can do that. But there are some states, I will pick on New York again, where trying to run a micro school can be very, very difficult. And then there are some states like Indiana, Illinois, Texas. You want to start up some sort of hybrid program? You go ahead and do it. That's the kind of freedom we like to see, so that you parents can say, all right, for this child, homeschooling is actually working. My wife and I have graduated 3 kids. We did a bit of co-ops during time, but a lot of it was just in our house, because that's what our kids like. We're all a bunch of homebodies. And then some of our friends want to nope, we are doing the option where they will go to this co-op on Monday, and then this one over here on Wednesday and Friday, and then we'll do field trips together on Saturday with another community. So our concept of freedom of HSLDA is we want the state laws to be expansive enough you can do that type of things, and we are hearing from parents all across the country, they want that too.
Yeah, so it's really easy in Pennsylvania to live in the gray. We like the gray. We like where we're not regulated, where we have the freedom to do what we need to do the way we need to do it. So if you want to call it education freedom, school choice, I know, school versus education, we won't get into that right now.
That's an 80s fight.
But, however you want to do it, Pennsylvania is actually really well positioned to be able to do it. But it comes with it some issues. So if you do have a co-op, if you do have a hybrid homeschool, there's lots of considerations you have to take into account. Do you want to be an LLC? Do you want to be a nonprofit? What do you want to call yourself? Do you want to be a membership organization? How are you going to file? Are you going to have employees? But the important thing is that all of these options are being generated by parents, community members, and teachers who know what hole needs to be filled in their communities for their children. And I think that's the really important part of it. Now, one of the things that's available is if you know about Kennesaw Hybrid, Homeschool Hybrid, it's an organization that promotes micro schools and funding for micro schools. There's Baylor grants. They help support micro schools with small donation amounts. There's a lot of different, Carrie McDonald. Who knows who Carrie McDonald is?
Tell us.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so Carrie McDonald is part of the Foundation for Education Freedom. Yeah, Foundation for Education something. I forget what the last E is. Anyway, but she wrote a book called Unschooled. She has a new book coming out called Joyful. So I'm sure you guys are all aware that like when your child is in regular school, it takes a certain amount of time for them to de-school, decompress, unschool, be unschooled. Karen McDonald believes in a true unschooling approach where it is truly student-led, it's not confined to hours, so she's a little bit of an anarchist that way, right? So I recommend Karen McDonald, but she goes around the country and she visits with these micro schools and these pods and these out-of-the-box education environments. So like in places like Florida, Arizona, that have these kinds of programs, have ESA programs, they're able to do a lot more in the micro school community and for the homeschool community. Pennsylvania, though, doesn't have those programs, so we're allowed to live in the gray, so we don't have the regulations and we don't attract the attention that some of these other areas attract. So when you have a co-op or you have a micro school or you have a hybrid, they're not childcare, but they're not a private school, so you have a lot of freedom in being able to do that.
Unfortunately, along with that freedom and living in the gray, which, oh yeah, I'm all for that, the problem is a lot of state laws simply haven't caught up with the reality of modern educational options. And so over the last, 6 months or so, I've talked with a kind of hybrid program that was meeting in a church in New Jersey that got kicked out of that church because the zoning board said, no, you're meeting 2 days a week, therefore you are a school, you're not just a homeschool co-op. So they had to go find another location or else the church was going to be fined. I've talked with homeschool groups who have run afoul of the fire codes. Because, for example, in Illinois, if you have a building that is being used by more than 5 students on a regular basis for instruction, that's now an education use building. And education use buildings in Illinois have to have sprinkler systems, which is prohibitively expensive for a lot of these that are meeting in older churches, somebody's home. So yes, all of these programs are coming up, but unfortunately, in some places the law hasn't caught up. However, one of the issues we are seeing that has been very helpful is some states are actually opening their eyes and starting to recognize that these things exist. And so, for example, Georgia, which is my favorite of the bunch, passed an education pod law back about 2 years ago that said every child has to be enrolled in some sort of school program. It might be public school, it might be charter, it might be a private school. You might file a homeschool notice of intent. But once you have done that, the parents of several kids are allowed to get together and say, all right, we're all in this charter school that's online, or we are all homeschool parents, but we want a community, a pod. And so they're allowed to meet together, and it might meet one Monday afternoon a month, or it might be every Wednesday, or it might be 5 days a week, and they're still considered legally homeschooling, which is odd to me, but the law is weird sometimes. But here's the very nice thing about it. It takes that gray area of, well, what are you? Are you a daycare? No, the law says daycare laws do not apply to you. Well, what about a private school? No, you're an education pod, so no sprinkler systems. You don't need to get zoning approval. You just start meeting as a group. And we've had several groups that have been able to wave that in the face of local school officials who are trying to shut them down as illegal private schools. Nope, it works now. So that's one of the issues that I'm seeing as There have been groups that have been affected negatively and have been shut down, but some states are trying to fight back. Utah passed a pod law last year, Ohio passed it just earlier this year, and we're looking at another one. It's either Nevada or Wyoming, one of the western states there. So that's one of the modern issues that I see moving in a good direction to help you parents be able to pick. We are homeschooling, we're in a private school, but we're doing it the way that is best for our kids.
I was at dinner with someone last night who established a religion so that they could have a homeschool environment to their liking. It was like the Church of the Child, or Children Are People Too religion, or something like that.
Our founder at HSLDA used to call that the funny hat exemption to compulsory attendance. If you could come into court with a beard and a funny hat and claim it was a religious right, you had a better chance of being able to homeschool.
Yeah, because they don't want to touch religion. They don't want to touch homeschoolers either, because you guys have the boss reputation. Nobody wants to mess with homeschoolers. Legislators don't want to mess with homeschoolers. And that's a good thing, because then they won't. And they listen when HSLDA approves or disapproves of a certain action. And so that's what I'm going to talk about now a little bit. So, show of hands, who would like money to help with homeschooling costs? Keep your hand up. How many of you would still like that money if it was tied to the government? Exactly. Okay. So, how many of you think cost is a barrier in homeschooling to the extent that you would like to provide it? Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about a couple of different policies, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it. So it may appear that we're at odds with each other, but Darren and I actually fully understand that different perspectives are great. Because some of you may believe one thing, and some of you may believe another, but that is the benefit to freedom. There we go. See, we got it. Okay, so has anybody ever heard of an education savings account? ESA, EFA, EOAs, right? Arizona has them, Florida has them, and basically you get a portion of the state funding, well, yes, a portion of the state funding, or all of the state funding for your child. In Pennsylvania, it's about $8,000, $8,500, right? That would come to you. Now, the method by which it would come to you, there's conversation about whether it would be a 529-ish account, whether it would be a debit card, which we won't talk about Arizona and that mess that became there. But, you know, what would be required? What would be permitted expenses? So when you start getting into the government money, you're right. There is a bit of an issue with the strings, but how it's administered, there's a difference too. And there are some newer homeschoolers that have forgotten the homeschool fights of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, who are like, yeah, that'd be great, especially the younger people today who are very wise, very technologically proficient, and are like, oh, that's fine, I can go online, I can debit my account, I can choose from a curriculum warehouse for my child. I'm okay with that. We have to buy a computer from a particular supplier, I'm okay with that. It just debits my account. Not a problem, right? Depends on how the state executes it. Depends on how the legislation is written. So it's not a bad policy to have. You may disagree with me. It's not a bad policy to have. It's how it's written and how you're engaged in the conversation so that those who can benefit from it will benefit from it. So in ESA, strings, government money, that is the concept, right? That is what people assume it is, and in practice, truly it is. But there's also a thing called an EITC program here in Pennsylvania. Anybody know about an EITC program? Okay, it's an Educational Improvement Tax Credit Program. An Educational Improvement Tax Credit Program is money that is donated privately into a scholarship fund, and then there's an ESA attached to that EITC program. So it's private money, it's not government money, goes through a scholarship organization, comes to homeschoolers. How many of you would approve of that? because it's privately donated funds, right? They're not giving you a list, they're not telling you what you have to do, and I saw your hand raised, yay!
Yep, HSLD has been that kind for decades now.
Yes. So I'm going to talk about one other piece of legislation that's coming through. It's called the ECCA, the Educational Choice for Children Act. It's a federal level EITC-ish program that is federal. I spoke to it at Congress about a year and a half ago. It is in reconciliation right now. It is through the Ways and Means Committee, and it would also, and HSLDA is also a supporter of ECCA, so yay. And so keep your eye out for ECCA on the federal level during reconciliation of the budget process. I don't know if anybody's going to ask questions about the Department of Education and what that fallout is going to do in terms of the programs. I have it on decent authority that the programs are going to be attributed just to a different department. So ECCA, if it comes to fruition, is something that is definitely still going to be in play. It'll just be through a different department than the Department of Ed. So, any questions about ESAs or EITC? Good.
All right, yep. So this issue of the education savings account, publicly funded homeschooling, yeah, this is one that has split the homeschool community since the mid-90s when I was still a legal assistant there. Because a lot of what, I'm sorry, I'm bad with names, Sharon or Shannon? Sharon, my apologies. A lot of what Sharon said is absolutely correct. It depends how it's implemented. So, for example, the idea that if you are filling out your taxes and you can check a box that says, I have kids, therefore I get a $1,000 tax credit. You know, that's on your 1040 right now. All you have to do is say, I have a kid, here's the social security number, you know, I claim them as a dependent, I get a tax credit. Great, wonderful. What if you could also do that, I homeschool my kid? Minnesota right now is the only state that allows that. You just deduct it from the amount you owe from your taxes. We like that one because that's you keeping your own money. Or the one like she described with the privately funded scholarship account where businesses can reduce their taxes by giving to basically a charity education, which then passes on the money to low-income homeschoolers. Yeah, I like that one a lot. What HSLDA tends to have problems with is either the refundable tax credit, which is I'm filling out my taxes and I claim a tax credit and now suddenly the government is sending me back money that I didn't put in. We're not necessarily in favor of that one. We're also really not in favor of the government just taking, oh, here's $8,000 and because you're not sending your kid to public school, here, it's now in your account. There are reasons why, I'll list just 3 of them right now. We're philosophically opposed to the government funding homeschooling because we see that as a potential for government strings. Number 2 is that it has ruined a lot of the private homeschool community in Arizona and Michigan because now co-ops know that you have more money and they can charge more, and so those who aren't taking the government are priced out of the homeschool co-ops and the private schools. But I'm a homeschool advocate, that's what I focus on. And then I will end with my personal one, why I don't particularly like the way that these programs have been implemented. It's because of how they were sold. The legislators were convinced to pass these ESAs in Arizona, the refundable tax credits in Oklahoma, with the promise we will be giving this money to low-income families who can escape schools that are failing. I like that idea, okay? North Carolina actually has kind of a low-income ESA or something. I don't have as much problem with that. But do you know what they found in Arizona and Oklahoma once they've been implemented? Oklahoma's facts and figures just came out last week after 1 year of running this program. If you take everyone in Oklahoma and say 50% of these households made this amount of money or less, and 50% made this amount or more, that's called the median income. That's $60,000 in Oklahoma. So half of the households in Oklahoma make less than $50,000 a year, half of them make more. Those who got that refundable tax credit, 76% of them were above that median income. And a full quarter of the ones who got that money from the state to either homeschool or private school their kid made $250,000 a year or more. Without revealing a whole lot about my income, I'm a lawyer, and that's about what I make. And those are the people who are getting state money to homeschool. It's not going to the parents who want their kids out of failing school. It's going to subsidize those who are already in private school. Now, that I have ranted about that, there are a lot of homeschoolers who do not agree with us on this, and if you don't, I don't take it personally. I will, however, be willing to discuss it with you. All right.
I disagree with you.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So does the biggest state homeschool organization in America, after us, Texas Homeschool Coalition. They're big on this and pushing it. So, all right.
But that's okay.
It is.
We're allowed to disagree.
Yep. So we've got about 10 minutes left here. I was wondering if we could talk about some of the things that we've seen as far as different kinds of options that have come up around. You've already mentioned some of them, but maybe dig into a little bit more of the details of how these things could look. Is that something you're interested in? If not, you are welcome to take it in a direction you like.
So, yes, I don't know that I need to go any deeper. Do I need to go any deeper? Raise your hand if I need to go deeper. All right, there we go.
All
So
right,
we're not
there we
going
go.
to. All right, that's flexibility. I do want to mention one thing, though, about West Virginia Hope Scholarship Program, if I might,
Oh, go ahead.
and get your opinion on that. So how many of you are familiar with the West Virginia Hope Scholarship? Put your hand down, we know that. No, so in West Virginia, you probably know more about it than I do, but they came out of nowhere, right? So Pennsylvania, we share 600-mile borders between Ohio and West Virginia. We used to be one of the most innovative, forward-thinking states when it came to school choice, charter school law 25 or so years ago. And we have, pardon me?
It was cutting edge.
Yeah,
Yep.
and we have definitely fallen behind. There are 15 states that have pretty fairly universal ESAs in the United States right now. In West Virginia, they have a thing called the Hope Scholarship, that there is legislation being drafted in Pennsylvania. It's very similar to it. And Senator Rucker was a champion of it. In the West Virginia Hope Scholarship, they have two categories of homeschoolers because it is an ESA program. I think it's worth $4,500 if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know.
I'm pretty
I live
sure.
on the Virginia side.
I'm pretty sure it's about $4,500 that goes to homeschoolers who want it. So what they have is the homeschoolers who take the funds, who take the ESA funds, are under the IIP program. Don't ask me what it stands for. But they are under district education constraints, and they do receive the funds. There is an option within the legislation to opt out of the IIP program, and homeschoolers like, just leave me alone, I don't want the money either. And what's good about that is it's already written into the legislation to protect those homeschoolers who want nothing to do with government money so that you can't backslide. Did West Virginia try? Some in West Virginia legislature tried? Yeah. Afterwards they went, oh, wait a minute, no, IIP has these regulations, so it should be good for all homeschoolers, right? So that is one of the slippery slopes that HSLDA watches very carefully and closely, and to your credit, make sure that those things don't slip through. So your membership with HSLDA, how many of you are members?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so this half and then a couple over here. It is well worth it. It's $13 or $14 per month, cheaper I think if it's an annual membership, and I highly recommend becoming a member. Will Estrada, why do we always talk to Will Estrada if Darren Jones is in the mix?
So Will is the attorney for Pennsylvania. I'm the attorney for groups. Will actually got invited here, but Will is a popular guy, and he was somewhere else this weekend. So I heard there were going to be lots of co-op and sport group leaders here, so I volunteered to come.
Well, thank you for doing that. So I do highly recommend HSLDA because they do go to bat for you. You also get notifications of what's happening in Pennsylvania homeschooling law and how it might adversely or positively affect you and your family. So that's my pitch for you at HSLDA. You're welcome.
Well, thank you. One last issue I did want to address, and it's related, is this. Have any of you heard of the model bill that was released last summer called the Make Homeschool Safe Act? Okay, a couple. So this was, a model bill is basically kind of a template. HSLDA has drafted a bunch of model bills over the years. The organization that puts them together is usually a think tank, a nonprofit, and you never expect the entire thing to pass. But what you do is you take sections of it and give it to friendly legislators in states where you'd like to see the law pushed a different direction and say, here, take this and introduce it. So there's a group of homeschool graduates, some of whom had a very bad experience in their homeschooling, and some of whom are friends with those and also whose religious and political views are significantly different now from what they were raised, who have put together a model bill called the Make Homeschool Safe Act. The basic underlying attitude of the act is parents cannot be trusted to homeschool without significant government oversight and, I would say, interference. It would make Pennsylvania look like New Jersey level freedom if this passed in a state. Among other things, your kid gets interviewed once a year by a certified teacher chosen not by you but by the superintendent, and that interview is without parents present, by the way. So the Make Homeschool Safe Act has not been introduced as a full act in any state yet. However, parts of it have been floated in Oklahoma, in West Virginia, in Minnesota's behind the scenes, but they're working on it. And then in Illinois, that's the worst one we've seen so far. And the problem with Illinois is we've got a whole lot of legislators who also take the attitude parents should not be allowed to homeschool without significant government oversight. And so homeschoolers are having to fight a battle there. So I would encourage you, as you keep an eye on what's going on in homeschooling, obviously focus on what you and your family need, but look at a national picture as well as far as what's going on. And so anyway, that's where I will end. And if we've got questions, Sharon and I would be very happy to answer them.
What can we do to advocate for homeschooling laws other than just being part of the SH?
Okay, the question was, what can you do to advocate for homeschooling laws? One of the best things is if you know your state representative or senator's name, make an appointment to talk with them. When in New Hampshire we were trying to get a law passed in 1990 that would make it from an ask permission state to a just notify that we're homeschooling state, homeschool families met with the representatives and senators at what we called homeschool teas. I was a high school student, I got to play the piano at one of those homeschool teas as these senators were meeting with homeschool families. That's one way. Second way is you've got two very valuable state organizations here in Pennsylvania. You've got CHAP and PA Homeschoolers. Join one or both. So I'm a member of both of the Virginia ones. And so that's a good way to keep track of legislation. And they will tell you, you need to show up at Capitol. We had a fight in Virginia just this year where we had to send hundreds of homeschoolers to the Capitol to try and defeat a bill that would have significantly made the homeschool law worse.
Agreed. What I do right now in my work, I call myself a PTO mom on steroids, right? So I just kind of got really engaged. We know running whatever organization we run or participating in whatever family-centered event we do, you have your cookie bakers, you have people who write a check and say, leave me alone. You have people who run the whole shebang. You have people who are like, hey, come to this thing. It takes a lot of people, but it all amounts to significant action, no matter how small the action may seem. So interestingly enough, it only takes 5 people to contact a legislator's office for them to pay attention to something they previously hadn't paid attention to. 5. The reason for that is because so few people reach out to legislators. Legislators, I appreciate the work that they do. I appreciate the time that they give and how hard they work. But they're not on any pedestal. They should not be put on a pedestal. They're elected to fight for us, their constituents, and what we want. And so we've got to let them know what we like and what we don't like, and we can't wait for something bad to happen before we start establishing those relationships. So keep in contact with your legislator. Be an active part of the process. Make sure they know your name. And so I'll speak to a couple of specific things that I have seen that are successful. I was just on a call with someone in Pennsylvania leadership recently, and I asked him, is it best to have a big public flashy event to call attention to an issue with a legislator, or is it better for it to be more private? He said it was, what did you think he said?
Well, I don't know. I would say it depends, but that's because I'm a lawyer and I never give a direct answer.
He said he personally appreciates and thinks people receive better smaller events, right? The one-on-one. Here's what I'm going to tell you though. The small one-on-one district interactions, phone calls, and Zooms can be extremely easily swept under the rug. I didn't hear anything about that. I don't know anything about that. Not that anybody would do that. So what my recommendation is have a tea, have a lunch, have an invitation event where you have parents, 5, 10 maybe, and you invite the area legislators and you sit down and you say, here's what we're hearing, here's how much this homeschooling means to us. Let's have a conversation so you can better understand what this is all about. Because so many people don't understand what it is. They may be on the education committee, but they may not understand homeschooling, right? And if they're not even on the education committee, they're even further removed, typically. And if they're not homeschoolers themselves, and they've been in district or private school their entire lives, and their kids went to district or private school, they sure as heck don't understand homeschoolers. They're afraid of them,
Yeah, that's true.
but they don't understand them. So establish those relationships. So, really quickly, op-eds to your local paper. They love having their name in the local paper. It only takes 100 or 200 words. You can call them out against, for. It can be complimentary or not. That's a good way to do it. Simple phone calls, simple district visit, inviting them to a tea, or big, huge rallies like sometimes I organize are good events. But anything that establishes contact is good and is a great way to advocate.
We have time for one more.
Just to follow up on that, like, I'm friendly with one of our state representatives, and
Good
I know
stuff.
she's interested in what we're doing, but like, I don't know anything about any of these policies, so how would I have a tea with her? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
how do I feel educated enough to bring up issues that I'm concerned about?
Organizations like Sharon's and mine will be delighted to send you brochures for free, postage paid. And we actually have 7 points for lobbying your legislator. I'll bet you can provide something similar. Yeah, ask around. Any of us education type organizations will throw information at you.
Only what you can handle, only what you need, and we take very kindly to being told stop. It's okay.
I think that brings us out of time.
12:30 exactly.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.